Good morning. I'm Carol Pittman, for those of you who might not know. Usually I'm sitting out there where you are, but this morning, Pastor Brian is not here. So he's on vacation, and I get the honor of starting a new message series called A Summer of Parables. Once there was a young married couple who lived in a second-floor apartment in married student housing in their final year of college. The final semester was almost finished, and they anxiously awaited the wonderful trip they would take to England with their school choir. The trip was expensive, but paid for by fundraising. And it would be a beautiful way to celebrate the end of their college career. Neither had been overseas, so they secured their passports, which were laying proudly on the kitchen table in their small apartment. Then came the tornado sirens. The couple rushed down to the first floor and began knocking on apartments, hoping to find someone who was home, who would let them inside and maybe even save their lives. Only one family was home on the entire first floor of the complex, and they were only there a few minutes before a train sound surrounded them, and they dove under the kitchen table. Out the window, they saw the playground lifted up off of the earth and carried away by the wind. When it was clear the tornado had passed, the couple ventured outside and looked up toward their apartment. Through the apartment window, they could see the sky. Not a good sign. In the few minutes that the tornado had passed through, it had ripped away the roof of the apartment as well as the entire east wall. Needless to say, the passports weren't on the table anymore. The trip was the following week, and it was too late to get new ones. As if watching their newlywed life reduced to rubble wasn't enough, it appeared that the trip overseas was out the window as well. Can you imagine this young couple's joy when they discovered both passports underneath the area rug in their living room? You see, when the tornado hit, it had lifted everything in the room and swirled the passports underneath the rug, safely tucked away for the trip. Have you ever lost something valuable and experienced the joy and relief of finding it again? Now, Brian uses this technique, so I hope it works this morning. For a minute or two, talk to the person next to you and tell them about something you lost and found. I'd love to be hearing these stories, but I can't quite hear you up here. The stories that you've told about losing and finding things are real. And the story that I told was true. It happened to our middle daughter. Miraculous findings happen. Found wedding rings, found cameras, found birth certificates, found contacts, found keys, found cell phones, and we have all experienced the feeling of relief and eye-rolling joy, looking heavenward and thanking the patron saint or whatever helped us find that object. Jesus used powerful, relatable stories like these to illustrate what he called the kingdom of heaven. These stories are called parables, and they might have even been based on real stories or happenings that Jesus heard about or experienced. Parables gave the ancient people a way to remember and to relate to a concept that was difficult to understand. Some of the parables were about religious leaders of the day, others about theological concepts, or about the love of God. Maybe the messages of Jesus' parables were lost on some people, but the religious leaders of the day usually understood when a particular parable pointed to them. Jesus was at times critical of both the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and finally, the religious leaders decided Jesus needed to be dealt with. They approached the state because the state had capital punishment, and crucifixion was a clear-cut way to get Jesus out of the picture and disperse his followers. As such, you might say, the parables got Jesus in trouble. We're going to be looking at parables in June and July. There are only 40 of them, plus a few more that were written as actions taken by Jesus and the disciples, which the scholars consider to be actual parables. Truthfully, we could go on all year studying the parables if we wanted. Don't worry. Brian has narrowed our worship exploration down to the parables of grace, as examined in a book of the same name and written by Robert Farrar Capon. If the kingdom of God is a hard concept to grasp, so is grace within that kingdom. So Jesus had to provide his followers with some parables to help them understand. The grace parables are told by Jesus after the feeding of the 5,000 in chapter 14 of the book of Matthew. In context of his larger story, Jesus is now beginning to realize that his work on earth will be accomplished not by winning, but by losing. He's preoccupied with the thought that he must lose his own life to make an impact on the world. And somehow that leads Jesus to a conversation about grace. The parable we will examine today is the parable of the lost sheep. We've already talked about our experiences with lost items and how glad we were when they were found. But can we relate to a lost sheep? Let's look at the text. Jesus has just explained to his listeners how important children are. And the text is from Matthew 18, 1 through 6, and 10 through 14. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a child whom he put among them and said, "Truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like the child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depths of the sea. Take care that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I tell you, in heaven their angels continually see the face of my Father in heaven. What do you think? If a shepherd had 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, Does he not leave the 99 on the mountain and go in search of the one who went astray? And if he finds it, truly, I tell you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that never went astray. So it is not the will of your Father in heaven that one of these little ones should be lost. One reaction to this parable is, who cares about a lamb when you've got 99 others? Wasn't it probably the lamb's fault she got lost? That lamb wandered too far away from her mom. She probably saw a nice-looking green clump or other that she wanted to eat, but it was in the opposite direction of the others. She fell down off a cliff, and then she was lost. Her own fault. While that may seem like a callous response, we've all met people who say, I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps, so should that sheep. But maybe it wasn't the lamb's fault she got lost. Maybe it was another sheep's fault that the lamb was lost. Maybe there was an old, austere ewe who walked up to this younger sheep who was feeding contentedly or resting quietly in a sheltered spot. That old ewe arched her neck, tilted her head, dilated her eyes, and butted the lamb, sending the lamb scurrying for safety. So perhaps it was conflict or jealousy that caused the lamb to be lost. Or maybe it was the flies. Seriously, flies and other insects can really bother sheep. Sheep get irritated as flies buzz around their nostrils. They can't lie down and they can't fall asleep due to those pesky flies. The only solace is to stomp their feet, shake their heads, and rush off into a bush for relief. Maybe this is what happened to the lost sheep. It wasn't her fault she got lost. It was those cursed flies. So maybe the sheep stumbled into the wilderness of her own accord, or maybe some sheep caused her to lose her way, or maybe some small irritations became too much for the lamb, or maybe the lamb got scared. Sheep are skittish. The slightest suspicion of danger from dogs, coyotes, cougars, bears, or other enemies, and a sheep will flee for her life. The bark of a dog, the howl of a predator, or a fight between other sheep could cause the flock to scatter. The lamb could have been afraid and run away. Fear can cause sheep to do dumb things, even put themselves in more danger. There are many reasons for a lamb to be lost, and so it is with us. We get lost because of family feuds, bullying in our communities, obsessions with greed and status, systemic poverty, unhealthy marriages, untimely pregnancies, abusing alcohol or drugs, fear. Fortunately for sheep and for us, there's another character in the parable, the shepherd. This is where we encounter grace. No matter what the lamb has done, the shepherd will come looking for her. We've been reading in the news about Mount Everest and the flocks of people trying to climb it. Fortunately, this parable doesn't take place on top of Mount Everest. If one climber goes down and gets lost, the others cannot stop to look for or even help this fallen climber. At those altitudes, climbers have to keep going to stay alive. But in this parable, just one sheep is valuable to the shepherd, and he's going to find it. Shepherds count their sheep constantly because there might be one who has turned over on its back and can't get up by itself again. Shepherds carry rods and staffs because the rod can scare away a predator, and a staff can pick up a lamb and take it back to its mother. Shepherds know when to take the flock to higher pastures where the grass is green, and they know when to lead a sheep down into the valleys where the water is clear and abundant. Shepherds will herd sheep into a fold, counting each and every one. If one is missing, the shepherd will go in search, even though a storm may be brewing or night may be falling. The shepherd knows the worst. A lost sheep is a dead sheep. Therefore, the shepherd is ecstatic when he hears the bleat of the lamb and sees the sheep at a distance. When he fears it might be too late, but experiences absolute joy when he can say, "I'm so glad I found you, you rascal." Perhaps we don't think the lamb deserved to be found, but the joy of the shepherd is still there. Remember the joy when you found your lost object? Remember the relief? Now imagine the joy of the lamb being found. Imagine the relief in seeing the shepherd's face, the gratefulness of the lamb as the shepherd places her on his shoulders and carries her back to the flock. Being found is resurrection. A found lamb is life, maybe for the sheep and the shepherd. Robert Farrar Capon, in Parables of Grace, tells us that Jesus is most concerned with the little, the least, the last, and the lost. And folks, that's all of us. Thank God we have a shepherd. And I believe that we can also be the shepherd. We can find and help someone who is lost. Don't you think we can look around our church, count the people, and find that one is missing? We all sort of oscillate in and out of lostness. Periods when we're strong and periods when we've wandered off toward what we thought were greener pastures, safer pastures. We are experts at being lost. And this makes recognizing when someone else is in that place not outside our area of expertise. We can shepherd one another. We can offer hope. We must share our stories of being lost and found with one another. This is grace. That 1 minute when we are at the mercy of the shepherd, and the next minute we are called to be the shepherd. Lost and found. Humility and courage. Grace received and grace given. But the real kicker about grace is that the experience of joy is there, whether you are the found or the finder. The experience is joy, and the story is grace. Amen.